Please welcome Hannah and our panel.
Hi, everyone. I've been assured by a few of you in the audience that the last panel of the day is the liveliest and most engaged audience, so we have high expectations. So I was thinking about kind of this panel, and I promise I'm not going to talk too much because I'm going to let our panelists shine here, but I was thinking about video and fragmentation and all the discussions that we've been having this week, and really and truly, I think from my experience, when I go in a room or a conference or a meeting to talk about programmatic, it's not very often that everyone in the audience is like, all right, we're going to be talking about video today, and that's like the first thing on their minds. So I wanted to level set with some data. So about $36 billion in digital video is going to be spent this year, according to eMarketer's Q2 report. 29 billion of that, so roughly 80%, is going to be purchased programmatically. So when we're talking about the overall programmatic ecosystem, just shy of 50% is video. So there's basically a 50-50 chance anytime you get in a room to talk about video or to talk about programmatic, that it's going to be about video. So it's a huge important topic that I know we've been waiting all week to speak about. So with that, I want to allow our panelists to introduce themselves, and then I would love to just hear, like, what is the biggest area of fragmentation that you've been grappling with of late?
Okay, well, hi, I'm Greg Anderson. I'm the managing director at Xaxis in the US, and I guess we'll go down and do introductions.
Please go for it.
I'm Krista. I am VP of Marketing for Satva. We're a D2C luxury mattress brand.
And I'm Jeff Snow, you just heard.
Thanks, guys. Yeah, so Greg, if you wouldn't mind kicking us off, I'd be curious to hear, like, we know that there's a lot of different themes in the fragmentation area of video, right? So we've been talking a lot about how you organize your buying teams or how you think about different screens and channels and tactics. I'm curious kind of like what's the biggest area that you've been dealing with?
Yeah, so at Xaxis, we view video across not just digital, it's also how does that tap into some of the traditional forms of video and how can we coordinate with the TV buying teams. But you know, when you look at video, there's a lot of fragmentation just in the channels, devices, formats that we have to operate across. So you know, some of the limitations that we see there is obviously at the device level, you know, you have different types of walled gardens that you need to operate in, mobile IDs to household IDs, and then you know, you touched on a good point around just organizationally. A lot of companies are still set up where they have TV buying teams and they allocate specific budgets to them versus digital. And what we're trying to accomplish is how do we bring those two worlds together to make sure that there's more fluidity in the budget, the way that we can optimize across these channels. So those are some of the bigger hurdles that we're working through right now, but we're starting to see some traction and growth in the way that we can coordinate across channels, devices, and as well as organizationally.
Thank you. Yeah, so I mean, we have both brand and agency perspective up here, so I'm curious, kind of from the brand end, obviously, as an agency, you have a lot of exposure to a lot of different channels and screens. What have you guys been buying in terms of video and what's been working?
Yeah, so you know, our business really grew on the backs of performance marketing and direct response marketing over the past 5 to 7 years, and we've gotten to great scale with performance marketing, and our first tactics with video is to kind of duplicate our performance strategies onto video. So, like for instance, like we have long form editorial content that we use for lead gen and SEO. Okay, so we're going to add video to all our highest performing content so that we can help it perform better. We duplicate our low funnel display retargeting messaging in you know, short 15-second bumper ads with the ready-to-buy video messaging. So we've seen success duplicating our lower funnel tactics on video. And the issue that we have now as we try and grow out of performance marketing into really building a brand and establishing a brand is how do you do that efficiently? Our CEO and co-founders, you know, came from the traditional retail space, and in their world, if you have a commercial on TV, then you've got a brand. And so we kind of like went out and spent a bunch of money on linear TV. Business is doing great. is it because of TV? Is it not because of TV? Like, we don't know. So we're really pumping the brakes and kind of like reevaluating what our strategy is and how we can truly use video to build a brand efficiently, because profitability is important to us. It's not to a lot of other D2C mattress companies, but it's important to us.
And we have a slightly different problem where our business is, 80% wholesale driven, 20% direct to consumer. So we have this gray zone where it's almost inherently impossible not to be slightly fragmented, right? Because some of our key retail partners want their own content. They want to produce it themselves or use kind of our inventory of footage to then produce their own video programs. And then we as the brand have to do something different or have to, embargo certain topics because of that. And we look at video as, the best way to deliver a brand message across all platforms that makes sense for us to invest in because we're limited resource-wise. We really kind of lean into like Pinterest and YouTube to drive the wholesale side of the business because that's more inspiration-based, it's more research-based, it's kind of that easier discoverability, and there's scale and some of that that's a little bit more affordable. And then we look at more of Facebook, Instagram stories, kind of being more of our kind of core competencies. But we're challenged in that we have so many different messages for each product family, for each brand in each region, that we really have to look at how to efficiently build that body of work, make it look, feel, and behave the same way, but then hand it off to other people to do something with it. It's really challenging. So, we try to use some DR tactics in our own environments, but that ultimately can get overshadowed by our wholesale partners that potentially have, hundreds of millions of dollars against our brand and market, whereas we maybe don't have that.
Yeah, so I'm hearing a couple of themes here, right? So I think we're talking and digging into how you're activating across different audiences. So I want to circle back on that, but first, I know the discussions this week have been really focused around how you're finding that North Star in terms of measurement. So I'm just curious how you guys have either not found it and what your stopgap solutions are, or what you found work.
So I'll take that. So one thing that we've done is actually created something we call our COI score. It's a custom outcome indicator. And what we're really doing there is working very closely with brands to understand what is the true metric that's driving their business forward. And so what we do is we actually match up data, exposure data from the campaigns along with sales data or any other kind of first-party data they have to understand what touch points are driving that performance on their behalf. So an example of that, we've worked with a travel company where they wanted to not just optimize to CPA, they really wanted to understand how can we generate more revenue from each user that's buying tickets for us. So we created a TRASM score, which is it's tracked revenue per seat mile. And what that's really doing is going a level deeper and understanding, did they not only just buy a ticket, but how far are they actually traveling? What class are they traveling in? Is it more premium? And are they generating more revenue for that user? So once we have that established score with them, and the best part is it's done with the brand, so we know that this is something that they really want to use and leverage across channels. But once that's established, we can then use that as a benchmark to say, these channels, these formats are really what is driving performance, and then we can optimize effectively from there.
That's an amazing solution. Thank you. So in terms of Jeff and Krista, how are you guys thinking about measurement for the channels that you're activating on?
At our organization, our analytics is not where we want it to be. Our data warehouse is not where we want it to be. And so we're kind of simultaneously trying to get our feet under us while not stopping growth, and really trying to keep growing as quickly as possible. So what we're kind of doing is really trying to measure incrementality, and saying like, okay, is video as a mid-funnel and upper-funnel tactic actually driving any sort of incrementality, and is it doing so at an efficient rate? So we'll just kind of try and do some geo-targeting and make sure that we are in measuring top-line revenue and seeing if our CPA costs, when you add in our digital and offline costs, if it's at an efficient rate. It's not the best way to go about it, but it's a way to start, and I think that once we get to a place where we are like, okay, video can drive incremental revenue for us, then it's more about, okay, how do we do this in the most efficient way? Where can we buy the media at the best rates? How can we measure it, et cetera? But at the end of the day, it's really about, like, is this actually driving revenue for us right now? But that's just where we are at the stage of our business.
We're also very CPA focused. For us, it's very manual. We don't have a third party. We don't have a software platform to use. So what we try to do is look at, native platform signals to indicate just overall health. And we also look at top line revenue coming in. And we also have some mixed goals because typically for us, the path to conversion can be longer or shorter, like obviously anybody, but for us it tends to be a little bit longer unless they convert right away. So unless they're in that kind of 0 to 14-day window, it might be 90 to 180 days. So we try to look at conversions in that 14-day window based off of where they're coming in and what platform's sending it in or what media is driving that. And then if they fall off, then we try to look at like subscriptions for newsletter, percent of new traffic and bounce rates and things like that. But unfortunately, that's about as sophisticated as we can get without an external partner or some help.
So you guys all shared kind of how you are tackling measurement. I'm curious if within that there's any sort of layers around how you're thinking about audiences and how you're managing reach and frequency. I think we sort of touched on the beginning that there's so many disparate supply sources and platforms that you can be buying through. I'm curious how you're going about reach and frequency management.
I mean,
Greg, do you
I'm
wanna
happy
go?
to take that. I don't know
Thanks,
if I should lead every time. So one of the things, when you talk about audiences, one thing that we really look at is personalization. So we actually have a dedicated team internally that focuses on how can we connect technology to creative messaging and do dynamic optimization, personalization, add in layers of functionality to drive that consumer experience. When it comes to then the point of activation, we really believe that in order to be smarter about what's really effective for a brand is doing more of an omni-channel or multi-channel approach. So typically we'll go out and have, connected TV, any form of addressable TV, and then we also layer in different types of formats. So 6-second we've seen is really effective in the mobile space. I think a lot of other people have touched on that over the course of the last few days, but understanding the mix of audiences, format, and channel is really important to understand how you can optimize across that. And then from there, you can really control things like reach, frequency, and how much exposure and personalization should we provide to these users in order to drive that performance.
Jeff, Chris, are you guys thinking about reach and frequency at all?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to draft off of Greg's point, because we don't have the measurement tools in place to really dig deep, we really look at the behavioral side. So like, is the environment an environment where somebody's leaning back or leaning in? If somebody is open to consuming more of that entertainment-based message, then we want to make sure our frequency numbers match what we need to get, saturation, whether that's, 10x or 3x. If it's something that is more transactional or more kind of noisy, we want to make sure that we're maybe spending a little bit less to drive them, but have more creative options in that space so that we're delivering enough new frequencies over time, but not saturating one specific message because we might need 3-4 of them to get them to move through the funnel.
So since we know kind of that video is working for you guys, I'm curious how you see that investment changing and how it maybe has changed in the last 6 months and how you kind of predict it changing in the course of 2020. Something that I'm particularly curious to dig into is specifically what channels are growing within video. I know there's been a lot of talk about CTV and OTV this week, so if you have any comments around that. Yeah, we can start with someone other than Greg. Thanks.
For us, I alluded to it earlier, we're looking at streaming TV. We feel pretty strongly because we're chasing that awareness metric that's a really strong place for us to invest. The exact budget breakdown is still to be determined because we're still classically waiting on budget, but I'm kind of thinking that we'll spend 60 to 70% of our total media budget against TV-like environments. And then I would also include YouTube as a part of that too, as really kind of servicing both, again, the wholesale side of our business as well as our own. And I just think that there's a nice behavior similarity between the two environments, depending on what you're going after. So we're going to go pretty deep, or as deep as we can in video.
I think for us, something that we've really learned is that the creative has to be kind of optimized. There has to be a different creative strategy per channel, and that is not something that we were super jazzed about. And I think Philip alluded to it in that, like, you can't create video, expect it to perform on social, and if it's all about the audio, you have to assume that people aren't listening to the video. So how do you get your message across that way? Or if you're on a YouTube and on a platform that has a skippable format, are you getting your message across in the first 3 to 5 seconds? And so so kind of creating assets for these different channels is, I think, really important. And you have to be optimizing towards different metrics. I think going after reach across all channels, that's like a big man's game to me. Like for people that are like us, that are like trying to perform, it's not just about like, can we reach the most people most often? Like that's never. You're gonna waste your money that way. So like you got to create and optimize towards engagement and things like that. So I don't know. Reach and frequency is important, but that's like you got to you got to grow into that, or at least that's where we're at.
Yeah, I mean, from an investment perspective, because we're more on the technology side, we're not really dictating the budgets by channel. But what we're really focused on is how can we provide technology to brands to help them determine where that budget should be allocated. I think where we've seen the most growth is certainly in shorter formats, like 6 second, but we've seen a lot of growth also within connected TV as well. So I'd say from the investment perspective, it's really been more in technology. We actually have a team that's very focused on ways where we can build an algorithm on top of the DSPs to work across them and understand, going back to the point around that COI, each COI is going to have a custom weighting. It's going to have different variables and different weightings to those variables. So how can we build technology that can actually focus and optimize into those weightings versus, a standard DSP algorithm? It's going to optimize to one point, and that could be clicks, that can be conversions, it can be completes. We actually want to optimize in that custom weighting. So our investment is more on the tech side, but how we can help enable brands to figure out what is the right mix and how should they be investing.
Got it. So, Krista, you touched a little bit on creative, right? And how that can be kind of a beast to manage across all the different platforms, and thinking about thumb-stopping creative, like we heard Philip talk about earlier. How are you guys actually managing that? Like, who's on the ground floor kind of thinking about those different things?
So our teams, we really kind of manage it within the channel directly, and that is effective for us when we're optimizing towards goals that can be measured within the channels. But where we're at now is that, and the reason why I'm here is, okay, how do we track and measure across channel holistically and match back our users across into one spot? That's really what all this is about, right? Is graphing our people back into one data warehouse that we can kind of touch. And so since we're not there yet, we really stay pretty siloed within the platforms themselves, and really try and think about our creative from the ground up that way. I don't think that was very articulate, but that's whatever. That's where we're at.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, for us, I work directly with the creative team because we're smaller, and we've developed an approach where we'll try to develop a body of work that we can pull apart and kind of optimize per channel. So that way, maybe it's building a 60-second spot that we can pull apart into 15s so that we have consistency in look and feel and also delivery and message.
That's smart. We do that too.
Yeah.
Nice.
See, you say it much better than me.
So what that's helped us do is get a little bit more efficient in how we're building per channel, because Chris is right. Like the optimization for Instagram Story in terms of creative is very different than optimization for Square, Newsfeed, Facebook, and IG. So how we go about doing that is to try to build these bodies of work per whatever message bucket we have to fill, right? If it's a product category or a brand message. The other thing is that we try to do a good job of pulling everybody together that kind of needs that educational feedback loop to report out on what worked, what didn't work, and then also talk about some theoretics behind it, right? If this worked, why did it work? Is it because the message is in the first 3 seconds, or is it because we decided that the message is actually this versus whatever tagline that came out of the copywriting side of things? Is it those kind of personalized choices that we make? Because trying to be a brand and speak peer-to-peer is really challenging if we're getting a lot of marketing speak and a lot of key art that's meant for, you know, in-store POP or things that are just not meant to be more personalized.
Greg, do you have a perspective? I know also being on the agency side, I think it's interesting to hear a brand's perspective and kind of like what that cycle might look like. Actually, do you guys have any thoughts around like how long that feedback loop takes from like putting a creative out into the wild and then getting the performance back and trying to optimize on that?
I think it matters on availability of time. But
Right.
I mean, you can see signals in the first few days for sure.
Right.
It's just how nimble internally can you be to affect it, I think, is the real question. That's
Yeah, I
different.
mean, it's always kind of funny because, you know, we'll go, you know, you might have the social team, they're like, you know, they'll get all excited about something performing really well, and then you have an analyst that comes out and is like, this isn't enough data, this is not statistically significant, we can't count on this, we got to let it ride. And so we're working on kind of creating a more structured testing process, and so that we can do it in a tighter, shorter timeline, because we just try and spend enough money so that we can get statistical significance as quick as possible, which for us can usually be about 14 to 28 days if we're spending enough. But I do think that it's really important when you're talking about testing performance is to like separate the creative testing from the bidding and the optimization testing. That gets way too hairy. And so, and I like to do the latter first. So I want to be looking at like, is this the right audience? Is this the right bidding tactic? Is this the right optimization strategy first? And then get into optimizing the creative, because creative is important, but a lot of times, like, that's not the reason why your campaign was successful or a failure. So you kind of have to separate those testing methodologies.
Greg, from an agency perspective, so I'll circle back now. I'm curious how that life cycle works in terms of optimization and testing and how what your cadence is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back to what you're both talking about, which is what is your goal? And so once you've established that goal, it's all about the volume of data you have against that. So I'd say, you know, once you've reached this statistical significance against that, we can begin to understand what's really effective. We also have best practices where we've looked back and we've seen that there are different formats that are resonating better with users based on the channels, devices that they're consuming it from. But, you know, typically, I mean, it could be within a few hours, it could be within a few days where we're trying to optimize against that. But again, we want to make sure that it's moving the needle for our client's business before we start shifting things around.
Got it. I think we are at time. So
Yeah, we have time for questions.
Great, we have time for questions.
It's a question for Krista especially, but you guys, other guys can feel free to jump in. So when you're talking about the incremental revenue testing, I was curious like how you guys assess or determine what look-back window you should be using for attribution.
Well, that's a great question, and it's tough when we're just now building up our upper funnel tactics because we don't really know what that attribution window should look like. But we know from the data that we have in the life cycle of our business, we believe like our lowest funnel customer journeys usually can convert within 48 to 72 hours. And our most upper funnel tactics right now is more in the 14 to 21 day window, which is really quick for such a high consideration purchase item. So then we're just kind of adding back some time to that. So we'll look back 30 to 45 days, and we just do a lot of time over time measurement and as well to see like, okay, is the lift in this geo at the same rate from the prior 2 weeks? Like, is that at the same rate as the rest of the country, or is it at a higher incrementality? I don't know if that's making much sense, but But then we'll do that initial reporting, but then also check back every 2 weeks up to 45 days after the test is over.
Staying on the topic of incrementality, Salberto from AKQA, I just want to make sure I understand it. Is it incremental mattress sales, or is it more upper funnel like landing page arrivals or something? It's a two-part
It's revenue.
question.
It's always revenue for us.
Got it.
Yeah.
Then how are you actually measuring that? Is there a control group holdout that has not seen any of the video or any lower funnel advertising?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll take, a DMA or several DMAs. We try and each DMA will get a control DMA as well that is the holdout. So we're measuring the DMA against its control, which we try and pick a control that's like a similar population, but also a similar ad spend, so that things are digitally, so that it's more apples to apples. So we compare the DMAs against its control, but we also against the rest of the country, all of our we call it non-TV markets, but it's really non-video markets.
Got it. And are you also holding out the lower funnel, like any sort of lower funnel messaging?
No, we tried that and we thought about it and we were like, what the hell are we doing? Why would we stop spending money where it's working? So no, we don't do that. It's just about adding in the media, not taking out any other tactics. And my goal is once we figure out a way that video is really working, I expect those lower funnel costs to go down, and then we'll start talking about pulling, taking those other channels out of our mix. But not yet.
How do you tie the upper and mid-funnel video tactic and the incrementality that it might drive to how it's actually pushing it to the lower funnel?
I don't know that yet. And that's why we're just looking at top-line revenue as a step one of like, is this improving the revenue in this market, or are we wasting money? And then we can decide, okay, how is it working? How is it affecting our other channels? How can we really do MTA and like folding that into that tactic? But that's the only way we could move forward, because we tried to do this for years, and like top line revenue incrementality is the only way that we found to actually be able to move forward where we feel comfortable spending in that channel.
Great. Well, this was fantastic. Thank you, guys. We're going to continue this. Jeff's going to lead the roundtable in this in about 20 minutes. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And of course, remember,